Thank you for joining us, to City Attorney Klein and to Council President Harden. I want to thank them for their continued efforts and commitment around reform and change, and so glad that they were able to join us today. Police reform and equity have been top priorities for me throughout my administration. The weeks since George Floyd's death at the hands of Minnesota police officers, we've heard loud and clear that now is the time for action. Today, the city of Columbus is committing to 8 Can't Wait, an initiative from Campaign Zero, an effort designed to bring immediate, data-driven change to police departments. We believe, and research shows, that more restrictive use of force policies can reduce violent interactions with police and save lives. We are firmly committed to meeting all 8 components on the challenge and to strengthening areas where the Columbus Division of Police already meet the standard. As of today, Columbus Division of Police are in compliance with 4 of the requirements: a ban on chokeholds, required de-escalation, warnings before shooting, and a use of force continuum. Additional guidance, training, and clear directives are required for the Columbus Division of Police to fully meet the following 4 standards: exhaust all alternatives before shooting, a duty to intervene, to ban shooting at moving vehicles, and to require comprehensive reporting. While the division already has directives in place to meet these requirements in part, more work needs to be done. We're working closely with the city attorney's office to draft clear directives to assure we meet these remaining 4 standards. We have advanced language to the chief with the expectations that changes will be implemented quickly. Yesterday, we announced a Chiefs Advisory Panel who, among their assigned responsibilities, will help the Division of Police review policies, procedures, use of force, and make changes to ensure that they meet and exceed the community's expectations. My expectation is that reviewing and approving changes required to fully move to meet the 8 Can't Wait challenge when the group meets in July. Change may be hard, but the goal is simple: to make sure our police force is meeting the needs and expectations of our community. As I said yesterday, when we banned the use of tear gas and pepper spray to disperse peaceful protesters, the time to act is now. There is an urgent need to take advantage of this moment that we have at this time to build upon the momentum generated by peaceful protesters across the nation and in this city to make the change we all seek and that we know is right. All changes we are advancing today require the input, advice, and approval of the city attorney. And I would now like to invite City Attorney Zach Klein to speak to these new directives. City Attorney Klein.
Thank you, Mayor Ginther. As the Columbus City Attorney, I'm personally committed to these meaningful reforms to ensure all of our residents are respected and safe and provide law enforcement with the policies that reflect those expectations. To align with the 8 Can't Wait initiative, Columbus must reform 4 policies and strengthen others, as you noted, Mayor. And my office has drafted language to address those needed changes, and we've forwarded them to you, and they're now, as you indicated, in the chief's hands. I believe these are straightforward, common sense, and necessary policy changes. They'll work in conjunction with other important reforms that we as a city and my office and me personally are committed to making. We look forward to continuing our work with the community, hearing input on how we can get better, working with the Chiefs Advisory Panel and leaders throughout the city of Columbus to ensure that not only these specific reforms are implemented safely, but not to rest on our laurels and stop here of the myriad of changes that must continue to happen to improve policing, give police the direction that we should be giving them, that our community demands and expects. Thank you, Mayor Ginther.
The changes we are making in the city require collaboration, and I greatly appreciate your advice and counsel. The same is true of our partnership with Columbus City Council and its leader, Council President Harden, who has been an incredible partner in helping to make these change and reforms move with a sense of urgency at this time. And so, Council President Harden, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to our city attorney. Again, on behalf of my colleague, I'm happy to be here today with the mayor in announcing an important step towards a safer community. President Obama issued a challenge to mayors across the country to look at their use of force directives and to see if it aligns with the best research available. This is an important step to provide clear instruction to our police force regarding how they should and should not engage with our residents. These recommendations, I believe, are common sense. For one, if an officer points a gun at someone, it needs to be recorded and reported. The current rules don't consider that an incident, so no report is required. I would certainly consider that an incident, and these recommendations would fix that issue. New rules will require comprehensive reporting on these kinds of instances. Additionally, new rules will require an officer to intervene if they see another officer using excessive force. Much like what failed to happen in Minneapolis when an officer killed George Floyd, these are safe and sensible guidelines. These guidelines are small steps to build an important function of building up trust, though. And that trust between law enforcement and the community, particularly Black folks, is critical to ensure we have a safe city. We know that many violent crimes go unreported because of our residents are afraid to call 911. I hope that these changes to CPD policy will reduce the number of negative interactions residents have with law enforcement, and folks will be more willing to call when they're in need. But this is not enough just to reduce the number of negative interactions residents have with officers. Campaign Zero, the national think tank who put forward these recommendations, chose that name intentionally. The goal is to end police violence in America. The goal is 0 instances where an officer kills a resident of any city. I and my colleagues on this call are not under any illusion that this new policy alone or any press conference independently will solve the issues that we face. But it is an important, data-informed step in a much longer march toward a safer community. And we're all in this for the long run. So thank you, Mayor, for your leadership.
Thank you, Mr. President. And again, thanks to City Attorney Klein for all of your work thus far and the work that continues ahead of us. Again, I want to emphasize that we're committed to change and reform, and we're taking steps to turn these data-based recommendations into action. The last 2 weeks, we've made great strides, but we are not finished, and we will not be finished until we have a police division that better serves everyone in our community, that meets and exceeds our community's expectation. Community policing. Now, I would like to open the floor to questions from the media. You should see a hand button next to your name. Click on that to raise your hand. We'll unmute you one at a time to answer your questions. Please be sure to unclick the hand after we've answered the questions. Click it again if you have another question or a follow-up. And if you could just introduce yourself and your news organization, and then the city attorney, the council president, and I will respond to those questions. Any questions from the media? I think our first question is from Nick Evans.
Hi there, this is Nick Evans from WOSU. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, Nick.
Okay, great. So, one of the things that is probably worth mentioning about the Eight Can't Wait folks is that, on their website, they have a letter basically, apologizing for the fact that their movement has detracted from broader abolition efforts. So, I want to read you one of the statements in here. It says, while we stand by the idea that any political leaders truly invested in protecting Black lives should adopt the Eight Can't Wait policies, we also believe the end goal for all of us should be absolute liberation from policing. Now, I know that you guys don't have to do everything that they want, but where do you stand on that? I mean, they're saying these are good policies, but they really are just a first step, and that the move needs to be pointed toward basically something like abolition. Where does Columbus fall on that? Are we on that path, or is this just sort of an interim measure?
Well, let me be very clear. I do not support or advocate the defunding or abolishing of the police. We believe police absolutely have an important role in the safety of our community. But we also need to be very clear that policing will likely look very different than it does today, and it needs to. The community is demanding change and reform, accountability, and oversight, and a division of police that is focused on serving and protecting all, not policing and over policing just some. My vision is for us to become a 21st century best practice for community policing. We are not there yet. And this announcement today alone will not get us there. We also know that we are asking law enforcement to do more than we've ever done before, and that the time is right for us to consider whether there are other ways to help answer calls for service that don't involve and don't require uniform law enforcement response. And there are models around the country that we are looking at to potentially help with mental health situations or those involving some of our neighbors who are homeless. May or may not require uniform law enforcement presence. And a social worker, someone who is trained in de-escalation, mediation, and conflict resolution could help get those individuals the resources they need, serve as a mediator, on disputes in neighborhoods, things that don't necessarily require the police. But it is not an either or. I think it is both and. We want, a police division that represents our values and meets and exceeds our expectations. But I think we also need to have a conversation with ourselves about the first time we need anything in our community, or there are any issues in our community, there are people that are calling 911 when we don't necessarily need that type of response. I think REACT is a great example here locally, where we have firefighters, paramedics, and folks to help people who have overdosed find the resources and treatment that they need to help bring them back to life, and then hopefully offer alternatives for them to embark on a journey to the treatment that they need. But looking at those types of models, but I don't know if the council president or city attorney want to offer any comments in response to the next question.
Mayor, I think you spoke pretty well on that. I would say what I said yesterday, that when we are done exhausting all the work that we would do on reform, if we have not fundamentally transformed what community policing looks like in our community, we would not have gone all the way. And so we look forward to that process of wholly reimagining what policing looks like in the city of Columbus. If it looks like it's the same way it does today, then we have failed. And we do not intend on failing on this critical mission.
City attorney, any comments?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo in conjunction with what you said and what the council president said. Yesterday we had a question about the phrase "defund the police" and whether we believe in it. I think the reality is there are dangerous people in our society. There are murderers, domestic violence, rapists, human traffickers, and police have an important role to play in protecting society from those folks. as well as solving crimes associated with their conduct. But we have asked the justice system, that includes police, judges, prosecutors, and the penal system, to do things beyond that. We've asked them to deal with homelessness. We've asked them to deal with drug addiction. We've asked them to deal with mental health. And I think the cold stone reality that we're facing as a society, that's not unique to Columbus, but this is an American problem, is that police may not be and probably aren't the best people to handle those sort of situations. But that's where we've asked it. We swept it into the criminal justice system rug. And we've said that the criminal justice system is the one who's going to handle these sort of societal systemic issues. And I think that's been a failed approach, that we all are responsible for, that's decade long in the making, that really started in a lot of ways with the war on drugs and has got it to where we are today. And so we have to be able to differentiate the important role law enforcement makes for when someone is in trouble and having access to call 911 to save ourselves, to save a loved one, from dealing with the societal problems that we also have that are mental health driven and drug addiction driven. And if we separate those and we're able to give and divert and spend the resources on the mental health and drug addiction, separate from our law enforcement expenditure, I think we start tackling the important underlying reasons why people may find themselves in the justice system. And the justice system isn't the place for them. That's not to excuse criminal conduct. This is a way of looking how we can lift people up to get them to change their lives and give them the opportunity to change their lives, to be the moms and dads they want to be restored tax-paying citizens again, to participate in the economic workforce where they have so many barriers put in front of them, systematic racist barriers, a lot of them, by the way, that we are coming to grasp with in a really important time right now in our country to deal with, to break down those barriers and give them the chance of success.
Thank you. I think our next question is from Bethany Bruner.
Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. This is Bethany Bruner with the Columbus Dispatch, and this may be a long-winded question, so I apologize in advance. But we've heard a lot about what officers should not be doing the last few days. No tear gas, no pepper spray unless it's a violent incident. And we've heard from a lot of police officers about what we're hearing, what we shouldn't be doing. What should we be doing if there are 2,000 people downtown in Columbus blocking an intersection, surrounding cars, like we've heard anecdotally, jumping on on cruisers, jumping on civilian cars, trying to pull civilians out of their cars, and officers are told they must just get on a PA and tell them to stop. And we've heard frustration from police that they're not being given any direction as to what they should be doing. They're feeling like they've been ignored and that these decisions are being made without consulting them as to what best practices could be. So what can you tell officers that they should be doing in these instances? And what should we be telling citizens that if they call the police to help, say their car's being jumped on downtown, what should they reasonably expect an officer to be able to do with this new policy that's been put in place?
Well, I appreciate the question, Bethany. Based on our conversations and consultation with the chief of police on this announcement of reforms and other reforms, I guess I disagree with the premise of the question. I think our officers know clearly from the chief and the leadership of the Division of Police what the expectations are based on these changes and reforms. I think the chief spoke to some of those yesterday, and we're going to continue to work with him. And as you know, the policies and procedures that are going to be reviewed by the Chief's Advisory Council will provide further clarity and direction for our officers on how to handle situations that they've been in the last couple of weeks or that they might see in the future. Obviously, we're going to continue to focus on training and engaging our officers in, community policing models that can help encourage, restore, and build trust with the community. You might have to refer your question to the chief about clear direction. I think that he's given it, and we have engaged in all these changes and reforms in consultation with the chief. Council President Hardin or City Attorney Klein, any additional comments? Okay. Our next question is Lacey Crisp. Our next question is from Zach Colasar. Zach, I think you're with 614, is that correct?
Yes, this is Zach Colsar from 614 Magazine. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
This is first a question aimed toward Council President Hardin. And also, Mayor Ginther did touch on this, that, no amount of pressers or like policy changes are enough, and it's going to be a slow process, having to reform the police in Columbus. But how far, like, have there been discussions about furthering education in police within the city officials? And because we've heard the comparison between a barber having to undergo more hours of work to get their license than a police officer has to become a police officer. So do you have there been discussions about like reforming education in the police system in Columbus?
That's a great question. President Hardin, I'll let you take a crack at it and then I'll follow up.
Thank you for the question. When we talk about comprehensive reform and when we talk about fundamentally changing how we do community policing, that's not. This is not. We're not just focusing on in one area. We're talking about the entire way that we engage with and view safety in Columbus, and certainly that includes training and how they are engaged. And so I think what you've seen this week, though, is an acknowledgement from city leaders that folks want change and action now. And so instead of waiting to roll out just one package, down the road, there has been substantive initial steps in that direction. But this is the beginning. I want to stress that from council standpoint, these are beginning conversations and community conversations that we will have followed up with, and sometimes in the middle through the process with specific things that we can do now. And so training certainly is one of those things.
The only thing I would add, Mr. President, is that the city of Columbus training goes far beyond what the state requires. Obviously, I think the state should require more. We're clearly already exceeding that. But I think what we're hearing from both officers and citizens is that we've got to do more. And so, we're going to be looking at changing that training. What else can we do to expand the work that we do in de-escalation and interacting with, vulnerable neighbors of ours that might be challenged with addiction and mental health? I know some folks have raised with me potentially raising the age of officers, that maybe a 25-year-old might be better prepared than a 21-year-old to really embrace, engage, and lead by example on community policing. So there are many other things that we're looking at, but let me be very, very clear, and the council president spoke to this. We're taking immediate steps for change and reform. The community is demanding it. The community expects it. And there are many other things that we're going to do over this next several weeks, months, and year ahead. But it's critically important that we show action and that we seek the oversight and accountability and the justice that our community is demanding. And so you'll continue to hear us talk about this. And it is part of this larger equity agenda. Police reform is an important part of it. But the way systemic racism and discrimination impacts the health, the quality of life, the wealth of our neighbors is something that's going to be a top priority of mine with our equity agenda moving forward. But police reform is something that we have to take action on right now. Lacey Crisp.
Hopefully you can hear me now. No?
Not very well.
Okay.
We got a lot of echo. You want to turn your speakers down, Lacey?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay. So I want to kind of piggyback off Bethany's question. I was wondering what directives you are giving police officers as you're trying to allow these protesters to peacefully protest. But it appears from all accounts the last couple of nights, those protests have not been peaceful. They've taken to the streets, surrounded cruisers, surrounded individual cars. What are police officers supposed to do in following some of the new policies and guidelines and procedures without using some of those chemical sprays, but to be able to disperse crowds? And I was also wondering how closely you're working with Chief Quinlan and the FOP on getting these policies going so that we have both a safe community and police officers who can do their job to keep the rest of the community safe.
It's a great question, and you're absolutely right. We remain in constant contact with Chief Quinlan and all the changes and reforms that have been announced and that we will be announcing in the days and weeks ahead will, be done in consultation with the chief. I've given him clear direction and changes in approach and engagement over the last several weeks when our approach and engagement I thought was overly aggressive and inconsistent with my expectations and the community's expectations of policing. And those changes have been made. As far as specific direction and guidance that the chief has provided the officers, I'd have to let him speak to that. We have not, given him any directives specific to how he has handled things more recently, but we are in constant contact with him about these changes and reforms and what our expectations are moving forward. Are there any additional questions? Not seeing. Bethany, do you have a follow-up?
I did. I had one other quick question for you. I wanted to know what your message is to the business owners, particularly in the downtown area and the Short North area, that have seen their businesses damaged or harmed by some of what became aggressive protests in those first few days in particular. And, the inability of police to arrest some of those officers. When you were asking police to fully prosecute anyone who would destroy your property when they were protesting outside your house last week, I was wondering what your message would be to those business owners when there seems to be a bit of a double standard for what you're expecting officers to do in those situations.
Not sure I understand the premise of your question. Are you suggesting that I have directed the Division of Police to not investigate and charge people involved in criminal activity? It's a pretty strong suggestion there.
Well, that's not what I'm suggesting. I believe the suggestion was earlier in those, particularly on May 28th and May 29th, when we saw people breaking into the State House and destroying parts of the Ohio Theater, things like that, that officers were not able, because of the large amount of destruction, the spread out nature of the incident, that they weren't able to handle some of those situations as best as they would have liked. And those business owners suffered as a result. And yet officers are being asked to be at your house and to fully prosecute anyone who might cause damage to your property as a result of protests that were outside your house. What would you say to those business owners that might feel like there is a bit of a double standard there?
Well, obviously, that is not a complete inaccurate premise or suggestion. I have visited with a number of business owners whose windows have been broken and that lost, goods that were in their stores and that are part of the process for, rehabbing, renovating, and then potentially reopening. Many of those small businesses, by the way, had been shut for several months because of COVID. I've been very clear with them and with the chief that any evidence that we have that can lead to an investigation and potential charges against individuals who vandalized, stole, or demolished property needs to be a priority, whether it's in a downtown business or any private residence. And so I think I've been very consistent and clear about that. Yeah, one more question, Lacey, and then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, I was wondering when these policies go into effect. And then I was also wondering how you balance that line of pushing forward new policies for the community and also working with the police department. I know Chief Quinlan mentioned yesterday 187 of his officers have been injured, to make sure that their voices are also heard so that truly you have that partnership between the police department and the community.
Well, with respect to the specific 8 Can't Wait recommendations or criteria that we talked about today, obviously we're in compliance on 4 of them, and work needs to be done on the balance. So those changes and that work will start today, and we're going to be asking the chief to continue to review policies and procedures in conjunction with the Chiefs Advisory Council that will be seated here in the coming weeks. That group of folks that we announced yesterday will help him continue to update and change policies and procedures based on the community's input and guidance. And you're absolutely right. I think we need to continue to engage our officers in how we go about reforming policing to make sure that they are safe, but that they are also able to protect and serve everyone in the community. And that will continue to be a priority for me and the administration. Any closing comments from the city attorney or council president? Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this afternoon, and look forward to additional conversations in the days and weeks ahead. Have a good day.